This month, July, is special to Indigenous Australians for two major reasons. First, there's the Coming of Light Festival that's marked every year in the Torres Strait Islands. And then there's NAIDOC, the National Aboriginal and Islander Day of Celebration. What many non-Indigenous Australians don't realise, however, is how deeply these events are connected to our nation's religious history. We'll talk about that in this week's episode, as well as exploring the issues of faith and identity that face Indigenous people today. Stay tuned.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
I'm on the phone with Pastor Darren Garlett from Melbourne. Darren is the Director of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Ministries for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Thanks for joining us, Darren.
Thank you, Kent. It's good to be on the phone and having a chat today.
Now, something I've noticed, Darren, whenever I meet an Indigenous person, they often, like the first or second question they'll ask me is, where are you from? For me, that's a bit of a difficult question because my father's side and mother's side are from different places and we've moved all over the place. So I just call myself a walkabout white fella. But I understand from your perspective, you do have a particular place where your family is rooted?
Yeah, that's correct. Every Indigenous person you sort of ask, it's who are they, where are they from? It links them straight away to a place of identity. And so for me, I'm a Whadjuk person. I'm from Perth, the Perth City metro area. All that region is Whadjuk country. And so I've descended from that area. I've also got other connections down in the southwest of Western Australia. And we've lived also out in the wheat belt area as well. And that takes in a number of different people groups there. But Whadjuk is the people group that we belong to. And so in that southwest corner, we're part of the Noongar people.
Mm-hmm.
Noongar.
That's sort of a generic term for Aboriginal people in Western Australia, isn't it? Yeah.
That's correct, yeah.
It's interesting how different states have a sort of a different word for that. I think here in New South Wales it's Koori, and up in Queensland it's Murray, and in South Australia it's Nunga, and for you it's
right.
Noongar. Yeah.
Noongar, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, hey, look, welcome to Signs of the Times Radio. We're really happy to have you here in the month of July, of course, which is where NAIDOC week happens, where in the Torres Strait Islands we also have the Festival of the Coming of Light. And now I understand, Darren, that historically the Christian churches, like these festivals, these celebrations are really quite heavily tied in with Australia's Christian history. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, a lot of the celebrations that we do have, we've had the churches starting a lot of it off in this country and bringing people together. Yeah, this time of the year it's a high month, July, and so you've got NAIDOC, you've got the Coming of the Light, and it's significant because it's about people coming together, and I mean that's what our churches have been always doing, is gathering people together.
Mm-hmm. So 80 years ago we had Aboriginal activist William Cooper, who really kicked off what was originally the National Day of Mourning, which has now become NAIDOC. He was doing that on the occasion of the 150th anniversary of white settlement, and he wanted to call attention to the present deplorable condition of all Aborigines of whatever stage of culture. Do you feel like that message resonates as much as ever, even today?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, its roots is really about coming together and putting the spotlight on where things are at. And even so today, that's what happens today with NAIDOC. The spotlight is on the Indigenous people and the issues that continue to this day. That's on one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, it's the Indigenous people celebrating, and in the strength and unity that they have survived, that they have been able to overcome many obstacles along the way. And so it strengthens them at this time as well. So it has a dual purpose, it sort of sheds light on it, on the issues, but also it's a celebration of where things are at. It has that determination to make things better too.
So in your role with ATSIM, have you had the opportunity to go up to Thursday Island and celebrate the Festival of the Coming of Light up there with the Torres Strait Islander people? Have you had that opportunity?
This is my first year, and in the office here, and in this position, I've got a trip there in September up to the Torres Strait, so I'll miss out this time around. Mm-hmm. But I'm looking so much forward to the Torres Strait. I've never been there. I'm excited. I've got lots of friends from there. Mm-hmm. Just feel that island life, that island lifestyle that they talk about. Mm. And I might be only there for a week, but I just get a picture in my mind standing, looking out over the oceans there that separate this country to other countries in this world, and with that breeze on your face and the warm tropical air. So, man, and the beautiful characters that you'll meet, in a place in a short time will stay with you from that point.
Oh, book me a ticket.
I'm looking forward to the Torres Strait.
Book me a ticket, Darren. It sounds like it's fantastic. Hey, Darren, I wanted just to talk a little bit about the experience of Indigenous people in Australia with living and growing up and being moved to missions, which were often run by church groups. That's a sort of a complicated history, I guess, for a church leader and an Aboriginal person such as yourself. So just can you just give us a little bit of a review of how it came about that so many Aboriginal people were moved from their traditional lands and moved onto sort of institutional settings at mission stations around Australia?
Yeah, well, it all came about. I mean, there were government policies put in place that removed half-caste children from their families, and so these were the children that were fair-coloured and what they probably deemed as not full blood. Mm-hmm. It's a way of sort of breeding out the colour and the Aboriginal race, and so a lot of families were affected in these policies, where their children were taken away, and the effects of that we see that today. We see it in our community today. Mm. I was just at the funeral of Daisy Cattable, who was taken away from Jigalong and down to Moore River, mm-hmm. who then, with her sister and her cousin, walked all the way back home, some 1,600 kilometres.
Okay, and this was the story that produced that movie, The Rabbit-Proof Fence?
Yeah, The Rabbit-Proof Fence. So I attended the funeral the other day, so I represented the Seventh-day Adventist Church at the funeral. When you go to funerals like that, you can see there's a political side that comes out in some of the speeches of how people were taken away and how the church played a part in that, how the government played a part in that. However, at her funeral, what was so special and quite touching was that, she was taken away under these policies, and it was, the police had acted on the policies, the church were involved in receiving the children. Yet later on in life, when she became an adult, she went back to work with the church. She worked with the Seventh-day Adventist Church at the Karralundee Mission.
Oh, okay.
And so she gave back to the church. It wasn't the church that took her away or the government that took her away, but just to know that in her heart, she knew that there was something special about being connected to the church. And later on, as an adult, she followed that.
That's really interesting.
Quite good to know.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Darren, because I've noticed a similar sort of thing over on completely the other side of the country, over here on the eastern seaboard, up in far north Queensland again, where it seems like the older generations, like the people who actually grew up in the mission, will generally give you very positive stories about the fun they used to have and how they learnt to work and how they went to school, and they used to swim in the creek and ride horses and play in the brass band and all these sorts of happy memories. And it seems to be their children, who are now adults, who sort of hold this anger and this resentment of what was done to their families, and they seem to be the ones who notice more of the negative impacts down through the generations than the people who actually went through it. How do you explain that?
We see that happening quite a bit now, where the older generation have really, they accepted it. They accepted it. They might not have liked the circumstances and their families at the time, but a lot of the stuff was beyond their control. And what how they approached it is really, they thought, what have I got out of this situation? What have I learnt through my experience of being taken away? And so they started looking at some of the positive things, and they sort of held on to that. And I guess for them, it's helped with their healing. It's helped with that separation. It's helped with their future of, looking forward and using some of those skills that they've gained. However, as they tell the stories to their children, and each one of them has good stories and bad stories.
Yeah.
For some, they might hear some of the bad stories, and people react and are impacted in different ways. And so some families will hear more negative than the positive, and so other families will hear more positive than the negative. But it is that next generation who sense the injustice of everything that's happened.
Yeah.
And they're willing to stand up against that injustice, and rightfully so today. But we shouldn't take it away from those that were taken away, to say that, hey, there were some good things that they got from it as well. And that's their own words. It's not something that we say that this was good for them. No, they're telling us that there were some good things that they got from that experience.
Yeah, and I guess it's really interesting that that very strong Indigenous impulse to want to return back to your land, your traditional land, for some people, because I guess they lost contact with their traditional lands, through that period, it's actually the site of the mission station that becomes a sort of de facto traditional lands for them, and they do, like all generations, return back to those mission stations from time to time, and have even taken over some of those under Aboriginal ownership.
Yeah, that's right. We see that with Roland's Mission. It used to belong to the Church of Christ down in southwest and Western Australia. And, it became a place where a lot of children went through the mission. And today Roland's is home for them. That's where their identity is. They're Aboriginal, and they've got connections throughout different places in the state of Western Australia, but they have a connection to Roland's. And so it's become a healing place for them in a sense as well.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing in Point Pearce in South Australia. The Narungga people there, still sort of go back there, or Far North Queensland again. Mona Mona Mission is very important to the the Jabbergai people.
Carolina in Western Australia.
Yeah, Carolina in Western Australia. It's the same thing all over the place. Looking at this issue sort of in a more spiritual sense, though, Darren, because I know as a pastor you'd be grappling with this sort of stuff all the time. In the mission stations, as I understand it, people were generally told, not to speak their language. They were taught to speak English instead. They were taken to church, every week. So they learnt religion, and a lot of them, for me, I find it very humbling that a lot of them say, one of the great things that happened at the mission days is that I learnt to know Jesus and love Jesus, and it's a really powerful sort of touchstone for them. But I guess now, with, as you say, the next generation sort of has a different view and is not wanting to lose their sense of identity, and perhaps wants to bring some sense of their Indigenous identity back into their worship. How is that done? And I guess people are dealing with it in different ways. How do you understand that this is happening?
I guess the connection to spirituality is what we all have as an Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. And for those that came through the mission, they were introduced to God, into a relationship with Jesus, and it was through the missionaries, and whether that was a good representation or a bad representation of Christianity or religion, that was their link to spirituality. And then we have those now that didn't go through those experiences, and their link to spirituality is tied up in the Aboriginal culture and some of the stories. Now, for those that have gone through the mission process and they want to reconnect to their Aboriginal spirituality, that can be quite challenging. There's bits and pieces missing, so and to be accepted and to embrace it, and not understanding it all. I find that there's people that come through and they've had a Christian experience and they've said, no, that's not for me now. I want to go back to my Aboriginal cultural spirituality, and yet to try and embrace it and be fully immersed in it, it's very difficult to do unless you've grown up through that. They'll have bits and pieces of it, and that's where you can sort of get some sort of extreme stuff happening. Yeah, without a lot of understanding. Okay,
well, I mean, look, Darren, you were at college, studying theology around the same time I was. So, you're trained in Christian theology. I mean, look, maybe I'm mischaracterizing what they are, but I guess I would see shades of, ancestor worship in some ways, shades of animism in some ways, looking at the spirits of the land, the rocks, the trees, the spirits of generations gone by. I guess for me, it seems to be a very inconsistent spirituality to Christianity. And if you try to combine those two spiritualities, surely you lose out on something. Is that an ignorant perspective, or can you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I guess for me and my experience, it's the wrestling between my cultural side of things that I know and I've learnt growing up, and then I've embraced Christianity, and how these two go together. Do they go together, and goes together, and what doesn't go together? For me, the foundation is that there is a God, and He's in control, and He moves throughout this world, and things happen, and then there's the Aboriginal side of the culture that says, well, things happen and they happen for a reason, and it's linked to something else. Those without God will say, well, it's linked to, our ancestors are watching over us, or this animal here is a totem, and he'll take care of us, and he'll lead us and guide us in what to do. So for me, understanding that there is a God and He will lead and guide, that's probably the most critical point. And from that point there, then we can say, well, do these other things lead me to God, or they take me away from God in my belief?
I've heard little whispers here and there, Darren, that some Indigenous nations in Australia do have quite a clear picture of a supreme creator being. I guess great spirit is a sort of word we hear from Native Americans. Is that the case? Are there some traditional Aboriginal beliefs in a great creator spirit?
Yeah, you've got up in the northwest of WA there, Wangina, and it's this it's a figure without it's got eyes, and they say that's the creative spirit there. That's the one. A lot of Aboriginal communities have got some sort of being that is above other beings in their belief system. It's more powerful, and even more powerful than the dark forces or the evil forces of what's at play.
Okay. So would you see that belief as consistent with Christianity?
Oh, yeah, very much. And it makes it easy for them to actually, when we identify that, there's a God in the Bible and He's there taking care of us, and He's moves throughout this world and wants to be in a relationship with us, straight away, in their minds, they're linking it, that's why this happened and that's why that happened. And so they're linking it to God. It's putting a label on it for them, even though it might be not an Aboriginal identified label.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Okay.
we were conducting a meeting a few weeks ago, and during the meeting at night we were outdoors, and there was a bright light in the sky, and I don't know whether it was the moon or it was a star, but it was a little bit cloudy, and there was a bright light shining, and one of the members in the Aboriginal community said, "See that light? I've never seen that light before."
Mm.
And he said that's God, and He's present here with us. He's watching over us.
Wow. So, sort of like the Christmas story in some ways.
Yeah, and so straight away they're identifying things that are happening in nature that is linked to God, that God is revealing Himself and saying, "Hey, I'm present with you."
Mm-hmm. And I guess a follow-on question from that is, how does this express itself in worship? I think I remember seeing you play a didgeridoo from time to time, or a yidaki, whatever you want to call it. Whereas,
yeah, I'm not the best player. I make a noise with it. But I've got some other friends like John Beck and different ones who are quite good on the didgeridoo.
Actually, no, I think it was John Beck I was thinking of. Yeah, he's played quite well, and I've seen him play in sort of worship settings. Whereas I know, like, I've suggested it when I've been to sort of Aboriginal majority churches and said, "Hey, could we bring a didgeridoo into worship?" And some of the old people have said, "No, we don't see that as appropriate." They seem to be concerned that this might be. I guess summoning perhaps not the Holy Spirit, but another spirit that's not quite so holy. So there seems to be in worship there seems to be different views on bringing more Indigenous practices into Christian worship.
Yeah, I think it's just different people's perspectives, because I've been in ceremonies where church functions and ceremonies where it's very spiritual and the didgeridoo has been played, and it adds this element to it. I mean, it's a sacred instrument, and the noise that it makes is unique, and it calls people's attentions, and it just gives that certain presence about what's about to happen. And I've had people from Arnhem Land and things like that, places like that, where they've been there for those meetings and they enjoy it. And then there's others who from other areas, and they'll say, "Well, no, that's an instrument that's been used up there and in those ceremonies and things like that." And so they're respectful of that culture and the sacredness of the instrument, and they want to define that this is Christian, this is religious stuff that we're doing, and we shouldn't use those things. So. Yeah, I mean, there is a tension between that, and every situation is different, and it just takes a bit of time to work through. And in some places we'll say, yes, we'll use it, and other places we'll say, no, the people don't feel comfortable with it here, so we'll respect that. Yeah,
fair enough. And I guess that's something that non-Indigenous people need to realise, that every different area, around Australia and, right up to the Torres Strait Islands, the different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations have very different views, very different cultures, and you can't just sort of paint everyone with the same brush that way. It seems to be a mistake that's made quite often. Now, just like while we're on the arts, I mean, the article that we're running in this month's Signs of the Times magazine, focuses a bit on the different art forms that various people have made to sort of try to capture some of this complexity, try to deal with some of the history and the even spirituality. The Bible Society, for example, I think last year it was the winner of the Australian Christian Book of the Year. They have a book called Our Mob, God's Story, where they have a series of paintings of biblical scenes, but a lot of those paintings are done in a very traditional Aboriginal style. Do you find that sort of thing is a helpful way to perhaps teach Bible stories to Indigenous kids, or to just highlight some of the connections and the themes between the Bible and Aboriginal culture?
Yeah, Aboriginal culture is all about engaging and sitting together, learning together, and sharing stories. Whether there's a canvas with paint on it or whether there's just the red dirt, stories will be marked out on that and told. And so having it on canvas in artwork form is just another way of sitting down together and learning. And so it's all about sharing the stories. I guess we have a lot of, in the Western culture, we've got a lot of story books and that are written, and yet with Aboriginal culture, it's all about the artwork and retelling the stories.
Yeah,
so.
storytelling, the oral tradition, it's really powerful, isn't it? Which is actually quite consistent.
Is, yeah.
I mean, if you think back to biblical times, like you read in the book of Colossians, for example, where Paul says, "Hey, make sure that you read this letter that I've written out to the congregation in Colossae, and then can you read it out to the church in Laodicea as well?" So it sort of tells us that the way that people experienced those New Testament letters, and certainly the way they experienced the Old Testament books as well, was generally by hearing it orally, not by reading it themselves individually. I mean, they didn't have printing presses then, so everyone didn't have Bibles of their own. They pretty much went together, met as a community, and heard that word of God being spoken together in that oral tradition sort of way. It's perhaps much more consistent with traditional Indigenous ways than whitefellow ways, I guess.
That's true, and I mean, the Australian landscape is really the canvas of where the story happens for people, Aboriginal people, and so retelling it is a way of sitting down and just repainting the landscape and how the story started and how it ends, and it's and the various symbols that are used today.
Yeah.
To convey those stories.
Yeah, that really reminds me of those verses in the Old Testament where it says that they set up a pile of rocks or an altar, or put a rock up on its end to sort of mark a spot where something special happened. And it seems to be that the idea was that when you'd be travelling through that area later on, and your kids say, "Hey, what's that rock there, Dad?" You'd say, "Oh, let me tell you a story about that rock and what happened here." So the landscape again is sort of associated with all these stories and with all this history. And what you've done there at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Ministries there in Melbourne, Darren, is that you've actually released just last year a book called Our Stories, God Stories. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how perhaps our listeners can get hold of it for themselves?
Earlier on, a few years back, we came out with a book called The Snake Bird, Bird, Other True Stories. Yep. And Alan Holman put those stories together, and this is just stories of our Aboriginal people throughout the country. It was a very short little booklet, and so we always have been using that as a resource, and we thought we'd update and collect some more stories to put into another one. And so it's called Our Stories, God Stories, and they've been collected by Steve Peets and Eileen Felberg. Yeah. And they've travelled around the country, but some great stories in it of different ones, and in their encounter with God, how they God or what He's done in their life. And it's just a good resource that's easy to pick up and read. It's got the photo of the person in there, so you can see the person, coloured pictures. But yeah, to get a copy of that the best way is just to ring through to our office here in Melbourne. Okay. And they can ask for a copy of it, and we'll be happy to send it out. Okay. Yeah. So the name of the book is Our Stories, God Stories, and the number there is it's a Victorian number, so 03 area code 9871 7555. And I understand you're also okay for people to send you an email, Darren? They can send me an email, and we've got other resources as well. So Darren Garlett at adventus.org.au. Okay, there you go. So Darren Garlett, that's DARREN. And Garlett is GARLETT, is that right? LETT. Yep, that's okay, correct. So all one word, Darren Garlett at adventist.org.au. Hey, thanks so much, Darren, for your time today. And all the best for NAIDOC and the month of July. And we really appreciate the time you've given us today. Thank you. It's been good to chat.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.